I've had the opportunity to meet many of you. My apologies if I still don't know everyone's name. I'm Sam McGill with the Institute for Local Government. We were brought on by the district to help facilitate this steering committee as well as the Shafter group. And we're really excited to dive into today's agenda. Just very quickly, we'll start out with a short presentation that Jessica Olson is going to deliver on behalf of the district, and then we have a series of exercises that I'll walk everybody through when we get there. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into it. As I said, we're going to start out with a short presentation. I think everybody's very familiar with the facility already. Don't need to walk through too much. There's food in the back. Please stay comfortable. Get something to eat. Restrooms obviously over to my right. I think instead of walking through the agenda right now, we should probably just jump into the presentation, and then I'll go ahead and take it back and explain the first exercise for the day. Again, thank you everybody for coming, and let me hand it off to Jessica.
Thank you. So for those who are unfamiliar or haven't been in a while, I haven't presented in a while, my name is Jessica Olson and I am a program manager here with the district. And before I jump into the presentation, I just kind of want to let you know what the goal of today's meeting is. So we've been through sort of this deliberative back and forth feedback process, which I'll certainly acknowledge and go over in a second. And really today, we want to understand where members of the committee sit with supporting all of these various individual strategies that are part of the CERP. So we want your feedback and something that we can sort of understand measure by measure where everyone sits, and how we can kind of take that, package it, and present to our board something that we understand how the committee is supporting or has questions about certain measures that we are presenting as a package to our governing board in just a few short weeks here. So I just wanted you to kind of know on the onset, that's really the goal of today's meeting, because this certainly, obviously, as we've talked about a lot, is really the last meeting before we present the final version of the CERP to our governing board in a few weeks. So with that said, Jess and I are here to give sort of a brief presentation of how far we've come in really the past several months. With all of the hard work, we've had long, frequent meetings, a lot of thoughtful comments, a lot of really good feedback. The steering committee has really helped produce what we think is really a one-of-a-kind plan. And that's to reduce emissions rather, and to provide public health benefits to the South Central Fresno community. So I really want to just kind of start off by giving a huge thanks and a special thanks to all of you, especially those who have been here to all of these meetings and shown up to even the subcommittee meetings, have come and met with us and talked to us, given us really thoughtful comments and feedback. And for those of you who have gone out into your neighborhoods, to your communities, and talked a lot about these measures, I think it really is reflected in this CERP, and especially even in recent developments and updates to the CERP. I think a lot of you can understand that you can see the most recent updates are really a direct result of a lot of the comments we've received from this committee. So I just want to thank you and acknowledge that on the onset. So yeah, clap, yay, congratulations. So obviously, and I'll get to this in a second, the hard work is certainly not over, but even for the rest, really the fun is going to begin soon, right? We're going to start implementing this and really putting these words to action. So I definitely want you to keep that in mind as we move forward. So the community emission reduction program is essentially plastered throughout this room today, as you can see. So we'll definitely go over an exercise on how we're going to get that feedback based on everything around the room today. But as you kind of look around the room, you notice that a lot of our strategies are really varied through different types of strategies. We have a lot of land use strategies, incentive-based, regulatory, enforcement, education, outreach, workforce development, and it's really, again, a really unique, like I said, one-of-a-kind plan that's definitely not happening anywhere else. This is very specific to South Central Fresno. So just want to acknowledge that and kind of take that for what it's worth. And really the whole goal of AB 617, as we've mentioned, and as a lot of you have pointed out, and we want to continue to acknowledge, is to get those emissions reductions and improve public health. And so together, I think we can acknowledge and see here, we've quantified that collectively all of these measures that we've placed out here in front of you are getting over 300 tons of PM 2.5 reductions, 2,000 tons of NOx reductions, and associated air toxics over the lifetime of these projects. So I think that's a really, really big feat, and there's definitely a lot of work ahead of us. So that was sort of phase one. Phase one is kind of culminating right now in the CERP that we're going to present to the governing board and then to CARB, and hopefully for CARB's adoption soon as well. But phase 2 is beginning, and something I kind of want to point out, for those of you who weren't at the workshop, we had a really, I think, very thoughtful and insightful comment from a steering committee member who asked that we point out to the steering committee that this CERP is really a guideline, and it's really a roadmap, I should say, for how we're going to get emissions reductions here. So just kind of keeping that in mind, as you can see that we've discussed this throughout the meetings, it's actually written in the CERP in a variety of different ways, that a lot of these CERP commitments can be flexible. The funding amounts can be flexible, the units that we target can be flexible. That could be flexible based on need. It could be flexible based on, say we go to target a specific strategy like charbroilers, and it's a voluntary incentive program, and certain restaurants aren't interested, or we're not finding that we're getting the cost-effective reductions that we need and want in this community. We are certainly going to continue to work with this committee, with CARB, with the associated agencies like the City of Fresno and the county and all of the other partners to make sure that we then target maybe something else. Maybe we move that funding as necessary or adjust that funding as necessary to focus maybe more on the school filtration systems. You know, kind of as feasible as funding allows, but make sure that we keep in mind that this is a roadmap. It's not 100% prescriptive. So it's something to keep in mind, and I want to thank Ivanka for kind of making that comment as well. And something also to keep in mind with sort of the fluidity, as you notice, a lot of these measures are brand new measures, something that we haven't quite done before in the district. And so those are going to require us to continue to work together with this steering committee, with CARB and the other agencies that we receive funding from to develop guidelines and how we're going to fund this, where we're going who we're going to target or what the funding amounts might be. Those things are still needing to be developed. And so that's why this is still just a roadmap. We're going to see where we want to go, and then we're going to continue to work with you on the implementation throughout the history of the CERP. So kind of moving forward, and the rest of this is a little bit of review, and so I want to kind of just move through this a little bit more quickly if you'll allow me. I just want to kind of remind everyone that the CARB guidelines require that the CERP, the Community Emissions Reduction Programs, include some certain specific elements, and that's community description. And so as you've seen in our draft CERP, that community description is sort of just an understanding of the community, its residents, maybe some of the sources in the community, but it also includes, to a lot of the points that have been made on this committee, it includes health data. And so we took that into account. We also recently released a health appendix that at the end of that appendix includes community-specific health data on certain indicators that are linked to poor air quality and how this community is specifically affected by that. So we want to recognize that, and we have recognized that in the CERP. So thank you for that suggestion. We also need to make sure within the CERP, and this is certainly in there, that we discuss community partnerships and public engagement efforts. So that's working with you, working with the rest of the community to make sure we're engaging people on implementing this CERP. We talk a lot about the air quality challenges that are facing the community. And we also talk, and specifically maybe the most important part or the meat of all of it is really the measures to reduce emissions and exposure to air pollution in the community. Once we kind of finalize those measures in the coming days, we will finalize, of course, then the implementation schedule. When are we going to start implementing these measures? When are we going to start seeing those reductions? So that's going to be part of the CERP as well. We also, as you all know, have an enforcement plan. That's a requirement as part of the CERP, as well as metrics to track progress over time. So how are we going to make sure that we as a district or CARB or the city, all of us who are making commitments within the CERP, how are we going to make sure that you as a committee know that we're following through with that? And that's really where those metrics come in. So as I mentioned before, there are a variety of different types of community-focused air strategies in the CERP. So I don't want to go into too much detail, but again, they are incentive-based strategies. And these are voluntary, as I mentioned, voluntary participation for public and businesses. We also have regulatory strategies, and that requires a public process to go through a whole rulemaking, and extensive existing stationary and mobile source regulations already exist. So it really is significant when we do go through that rulemaking process for some of the stationary sources we've already discussed. There are outreach and engagement strategies. So there are a number of public education and actions that residents and businesses can take that will help further reduce emissions or reduce exposure to emissions. We also talk a lot about partnerships with other agencies, and this is for sources within our jurisdiction that or outside of our jurisdiction rather, or even sources within our jurisdiction that maybe there's funding that we can leverage from other agencies. So that's sort of both of those couched right there, and that would be CARB, as I mentioned, the city and the county, and Department of Pesticide Regulations, which again, as you noticed in our last update, we are including a pesticide measure for South Central Fresno as well. And then finally, there are exposure reduction strategies. So those are the air filtration systems, the weatherization programs, and the vegetative barriers within the CERP. So without further ado, I don't want to spend too much time on this. I just want to kind of remind you, we've really come really far, and there have been a lot of strategies that have evolved throughout this time. So there are a number of strategies specifically for heavy-duty mobile sources that include incentive measures to replace heavy-duty trucks, yard trucks, TRUs, which are those transportation refrigeration units, as well, or with clean engine technologies, as well as alternative fuel strategies and charging infrastructure. And then there's also, as we've talked about through a number of meetings, significant interest from the community in rerouting heavy-duty trucks in partnership with the city and the county to address some of those emissions. So something I also want to note, just as a note there, is in fact, again, if you saw our most recent update, the city has committed to continue to work with us. We will search for funding in order to find a way to study the effects or what can be the outcome of rerouting traffic. So that is a commitment from the city and a commitment from the district to work with the city on that. So I want to thank you again for that comment as well. And then of course there are statewide measures for heavy duty trucks. This is a mobile source and it is under CARB's purview. We also have passenger car measures. So those are those tune-in, tune-up events where you can bring in your old vehicle and get repairs or replacement funding depending on your income level. We also have enhanced access and outreach to those incentive programs through our Drive Clean program, as well as a rideshare program, electric charging infrastructure, increased educational training for EV mechanics, and again, statewide measures because it is a mobile source. So to go through the rest of the emissions reductions measures just briefly, you know her very well. I'm going to pass it on to Jessica Correa, our Senior Air Quality Specialist, before we move on to our next exercise.
Awesome. Thanks, Jess. So moving on to agricultural sources, we did hear from the steering committee that there was an interest in promoting alternatives to agricultural burning. So we developed an incentive program. It's actually an extension of a pilot incentive program that we implemented valley-wide. We developed specific incentives for this area for that measure. And then we also heard directly from the steering committee that there's concern from the community about pesticide use in and around the area. So CARB and DPR are working on a measure to be incorporated in the CERP. We also wanted to stress that in addition to these CERP-specific measures, there are still ongoing valley-wide measures that are going to achieve reductions from agricultural sources. So those are regulatory, like our CMP rule, which requires conservation management plans to be submitted by large agricultural operations to reduce their PM emissions. We require kind of limitations in emissions from confined animal facilities. There's dust regulations, things like that really impact our agricultural operations already. As well as incentive measures for maybe off-road mobile sources that we don't have jurisdiction over. We offer incentives to reduce diesel particulate emissions from tractors, agricultural pump engines. We have an incentive program for nut harvesters to reduce dust from harvesting activities. Things like that are implemented valley-wide and also achieve reductions in the community. So we just wanted to stress that. Similarly, moving on to industrial sources, we do have very stringent existing regulations that impact our stationary sources already. So keep in mind that those stringent regulatory requirements are going to still be in effect. They're impacting stationary sources to date, but we also have targeted measures developed for the CERP for sources in the South Central Fresno community. So Those are going to include incentive measures for biomass facilities, glass manufacturing, and chrome plating operations. Chrome plating operations result in the emissions of hexavalent chromium, which is a very toxic air contaminant. So this incentive program can really impact public health by reducing those emissions for sources that might not be able to install those controls already because they're so expensive. We committed to an expedited review of district rules to ensure they meet or exceed BARCT with the schedule adopted by our district governing board already in December 2018. So that review is occurring already, and we'll be updating our rules as needed to meet those BARCT requirements. We also committed to take into account steering committee and community feedback in the amendment of district rules, as we committed to already amend those rules in our 2018 PM 2.5 plan. We're going to be kind of taking a special look at sources within this community and taking into account, how reductions needed in this community might impact valley-wide sources as well. For the first time, incentives are going to be available through CARB incentive program guidelines to install advanced control technologies besides those we already discussed. And they're listed as TBD in our CERP because we really don't have a great idea of what those programs might look like. And this is where the steering committee guidance and feedback from the community is going to be really important as we work for implementation in the future. So we also have, in addition to those incentive measures and regulatory measures, we've committed to enhanced enforcement for facilities found to be in non-compliance of air quality regulations. We've committed to prioritize the review of facilities in our AB 617 communities under AB 2588, which is our air toxic hotspots program. We are providing training for gasoline dispensing operations to reduce leaks and the potential for contamination from those sources. And then also, just to reemphasize, those valley-wide regulatory strategies are going to continue to achieve reductions in the community. So, of course, the majority of our emissions, looking at the emissions inventory, come from mobile sources. They're not from those industrial sources. Mobile sources, as well as sources in and around the community. So residential and urban sources have the potential to really impact the health of people because they occur at their house, at their business, in spaces where they're spending a lot of time. So to address these residential and urban sources, we have committed to a kind of a suite of measures. We have enhanced enforcement of our District Regulation 8 requirements. This is going to reduce dust exposure in the community from construction and earth moving activities. This was in response to direct concerns from the steering committee. We also have committed to increased enforcement in the community of our residential wood burning curtailments. This is going to follow our recent amendment of Rule 4901, which is going to result in fewer days where burning in fireplaces is allowed. Coupled with this enhanced enforcement, that should reduce exposure to wood smoke in the community. We're coupling that enforcement and regulatory strategy with increased outreach and access to incentives for wood-burning devices to replace those wood-burning fireplaces or wood stoves with natural gas or electric devices. We will also be providing incentives for residential and commercial lawn and garden equipment, as well as there's a CARB measure to amend the SOAR regulation, which covers commercial and residential lawn and garden equipment. And then we're going to be providing targeted outreach and access to incentives to control commercial under-fire charbroiling emissions. Under-fire charbroiling is a large percentage of our PM 2.5 emissions in the community, so this measure is going to reduce those PM 2.5 emissions for residents in the community. And then, importantly, we've heard a lot of feedback from the steering committee that reducing exposure for sensitive receptors like children is really important. So we have a pilot program to install advanced air filtration systems at community schools. Right now, we have $100,000 slated for this program. We have indoor air quality improvement measures, urban greening measures, partnerships with cities and the county to install vegetative barriers at air pollution sources of concern, targeted anti-idling measures near schools, medical centers, and residences, and a goal of increasing our enrollment in the House Schools program, which helps students, teachers, and parents understand air pollution impacts and how to reduce their exposure to them. Speaking of partnerships, a main focus of the steering committee has been land use focused concerns. And so a really great collaboration that's come out of the AB 617 process has been a strong partnership with the city. That's directly led to several measures focused on land use, which include CEQA assistance, measures to enhance public participation in land use processes, promotion of active transportation measures, and the commitment by the city to lead a truck rerouting study. This slide in particular captures a new measure, which is going to be land use 4 in your spreadsheet here, and also up on the wall, which is a commitment to continue to collaborate with the city to enhance public participation in those land use processes and continue to look for increased opportunity for that public engagement. Speaking of partnerships, partnerships have been really critical to this process. In addition to the city, we have the COGS at the table, working with the county. The EOC is featured as one of our partners for those indoor air quality measures, where CARB has been at every steering committee meeting and is a really instrumental partner in this process, as well as committing specific measures to achieve emission reductions in the community. And then we're also partnering with OEHA, the Public Utilities Commission, and others through this process. So it's been a very collaborative process to achieve emission reductions in the community. And we're really excited about building those partnerships and continuing that work moving forward. A big part of moving forward with us is going to be continued advocacy for funding. And so one of the measures commits to partner with community groups to continue to bring funding to the AB 617 community. So what does that implementation timeline look like? This is probably going to be the last time you hear me talk about next steps for CERP development, which might be really exciting for everyone here. I think moving forward, we'll be talking about next steps in implementation. But for right now, we are at our last steering committee meeting before the governing board. We're hoping to get final recommendations from the steering committee on measures tonight. But if you have any final comments, we're asking for those written comments to be submitted by Friday, September 6th. We'll be publishing our final proposed CERP 1 week prior to the governing board. We'll be shooting for September 12th, which was the date on our last handout, but it might be the 13th, kind of on timing, based on our ongoing collaboration. Important date, Red Letter Day, the September 19th is going to be our district governing board meeting, and then we have ongoing implementation into October. So with that, I will turn it over to Jamie, who has a quick announcement.
I just want to apologize. This spreadsheet is an older version, thanks to Monica for realizing it. In the craziness of today, I printed an older version. So it has things on there from about 3 weeks ago. It doesn't have things on there from last week. What is on the walls and what is in the Spanish version of what is on the walls is correct.
Great, thank you for that clarification, Jamie. All right, so I'll run through some instructions real quick. I know that there's a couple of questions, both on the steering committee and members of the public as well, but if it's okay, I'll run through the instructions for the exercise and then come back for any clarifying questions after that. So as Jessica mentioned, the goal for today is really to provide feedback on both the strategies and the plan itself to give the governing board the tools it needs to adopt the CERP at that September 19th meeting. So we have kind of two exercises that we're hoping to run through with everybody. The first is giving you an opportunity to provide your thoughts on the strategies themselves. And you'll see around the room, each one of the strategies is listed on a piece of poster paper. And for members of the steering committee, it starts right here with mobile sources and heavy diesel specifically. There's also pieces on other mobile sources, cars, residential, wood burning, agriculture, stationary sources, land use, and then in the back, I'm not sure what all of them are back there. There's quite a few. Outreach and education and those sorts of things are on the back wall. Each one of the steering committee members should have an envelope that has 3 colors of Post-its in it, green, yellow, and pink. If you don't have one, that's okay. We have tons more up here. And if you run out, that's okay too. We can certainly provide you with more. But what we would kind of ask is that you spend 45 minutes or so walking around each one of the strategies and consider first and foremost whether you're generally supportive of the strategy and why, and post that on a green Post-it. The yellow is if you can kind of live with it, but you have some changes that you might suggest. You'll use the yellow for that. And finally, if you're just really not comfortable with the strategy, please go ahead and write a comment on a pink one and tell us why you're not comfortable with it and what could be improved to make it more useful at reducing emissions as a whole. We would also ask, as you write your comments on there, that you put your name on this, and the reason for that is so that staff can follow up if they have any questions afterwards on your comment. So that's kind of exercise number 1. Right. So don't, yeah. Don't feel bad if you run out. We have plenty more. But realizing the strategies, we'll circle back around to questions in just a moment, if I could just run through the rest of the instructions here. We realize that in addition to the strategies, you also might have general comments on the plan itself. So we also want to provide some time after the posted exercise to circle back around, and we'll go to steering committee members first at the table, take your questions and comments, and then of course members of the public as well. I know we have a couple of questions from the public and members of the steering committee, though. I'll ask, hopefully the instructions are clear to everybody, you understand what we're going to do, but let's go ahead and check in. I saw a couple hands raised as well, so let's take care of those. Did you have a question? And then over here. What can be in just go ahead.
So my question is, today is our last meeting, yet you're going to continue receiving comments until Friday, and you're going to post a revised version on Thursday. I really think that we need another meeting before you take that final version to your board. Otherwise, what you will take to them, we won't be able to have a final say or say, yes, this is the plan we really want. So I would like to make a motion that we have one more meeting after the 13th, probably on the 16th, so that we can actually review the final version and endorse it, or otherwise we don't even know what's going to be the content in the final document that will be adopted.
Great. Thank you for that comment. We'll circle back around to that at the end of the meeting, have a chance to discuss it a little bit with staff, and come back together at the end. A motion, understood. I do understand. I'm sorry for. Okay. I appreciate that, and I would remind the group we do have a charter, and I do want to make sure to abide to the rules in the charter that you agreed to. Okay. We'll take a look at it. Any comment from staff on the need for an additional meeting?
Check, check, check.
There we go.
I will just say quickly, but regardless of the logistics of voting, that the 13th is our sort of like mandated deadline to post the final before we take it to a governing board. We can't take anything to our governing board if we haven't given it that week notice. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, let me run a mic over to you real quickly. And I know we have one additional question here. Any additional thoughts from staff, though? I know obviously there's some concern about not having the opportunity to review the absolute final product.
I just want to reiterate why I'm saying we need another meeting, because otherwise the document that will be taken to the board for adoption is not something that would have the complete endorsement of this steering committee, which is what needs to be. And I just want to remind that our charter has voting as a decision mechanism to make decisions. So if I made a motion and we have a second, we need to move to the vote. I don't know why we're checking if that's the charter or not.
All right. We anticipated that the question of voting may come up. I would point out, and I don't want to contradict anything because I know that we're sort of, the Institute for Local Government is kind of parachuting in right at the end of the process. So please correct me if I'm wrong. The charter lays out some items for seeking consensus from this group. To the best of my knowledge, it does not specifically mention voting. But I could be wrong, and like I said.
So,
okay.
just really quickly, if
Please,
I can, just
Jessica,
to kind of help steer this along. So kind of, they're taking a vote on whether they recommend an additional meeting before we post the final CERP. So through, I guess, the facilitator of the chair, they can certainly take a vote and recommend that. And then I agree, we're looking right now at dates and kind of take that, but if that's the will of the first and second, they can take to make that recommendation.
Thank you. So maybe just a show of hands, if that's acceptable. There's a suggestion for an additional meeting between now and September 13th to go over the final plan. All right. All those in favor? Yep. Wonderful. It does look like there is a great deal of support for that. So as Jessica mentioned, we'll take a look at dates and circle back around at the end of the meeting. Thank you. I believe there's one more question, then we do need to move on to the exercise to make sure to get all your feedback.
Buenas noches, mi nombre es Irma. Ok, nos van a dar cierto tiempo para escoger cuáles son, creemos que son mejor para la comunidad. Pero lo que no estoy viendo en el papel es las cantidades. ¿Cuánto dinero piensan darle a ese proyecto y a cuántas personas? Por ejemplo, estaban diciendo algo de reducción para los bases escolares y solamente pusieron 16 bases. Entonces, aunque yo esté de acuerdo con la propuesta, 16 bases no es suficiente. Entonces, no es nada más la propuesta en sí, es a quién va a beneficiarla. Entonces, yo pienso que eso debería de haber puesto en cada papel, cuántos van a ser los beneficiados y cuánta cantidad se le va a dar. Ahora, la señora comentó que este papel está equivocado y es de los principales para yo darme una idea qué es lo que realmente se va a hacer en la comunidad. Entonces, no puedo yo apoyar algo que solamente va a hacer a ciertas personas y muy limitado.
So just really briefly to touch on that, that is a summary of what is in here. And in here it's correct, and we have a shortened version in English and in Spanish that will have the amounts that will tell you exactly how much per measure, how much per bus, which would equate to what each of them are getting.
¿Y dónde está ese papel? Porque dijo que este estaba equivocado.
I can't hear. Yes, so that is all summarized also in a write-up. So this emissions table we acknowledged is the incorrect one. There is a write-up on this table that has the correct stuff. It's just more descriptive and not as summarized.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you for those questions. So at this point, we would like to go ahead and start the first exercise. If you're a member of the steering committee, and please make sure to grab one of these envelopes that has Post-its in it. We also have a number of members of the public here as well, and we would just encourage you to submit comments. Staff will be next to each one of the stations that are set up to answer any of your questions. and we'll take about 45 minutes for the first exercise, and then reconvene for your questions and comments on the plan in general. Any questions about the exercise itself before we get started? All right, so we encourage you to start over here and work your way around the room. Thank you. Thank you, Jamie. Yeah, start wherever you would like.
Cool. And everybody, just really a quick announcement about this worksheet. The only thing that's different from kind of the updated version that we told you about earlier is the addition of 2 land use measures. So on the wall, you'll see land use measure 3 and land use measure 4. The rest of the emissions are correct in here. So it's just the addition of those 2 measures.
All right, thank you, everybody. Well, so we'll wrap up in just a couple minutes. I'll say, looking around the room, there's clearly a lot of support for some of the strategies, which is really encouraging. I know that all of you have worked really hard to get the plan to this point. There's also, there's clearly a number that have sort of pink clusters on them. And one of the common threads that we saw there were that they were primarily about the level of incentive given or questions about how things could be monitored for. So there may be support even for those strategies that have a lot of pink on them, but there's still some questions that need to be answered moving forward. So that's very encouraging to see, and I know that the district is going to be digesting all of the great comments that you provided over the coming days. But we did want to give you the opportunity just to ask any final questions before we wrap up, and then we just have a few small comments at the end. I see a couple hands up, so we'll run the mic out to you. One note about the meeting that was requested by the committee. Staff is going to look into dates, and they'll get back to you after this meeting as soon as possible on that. But we just need to figure out the logistics of when exactly that would happen. But looking around the room, any comments? I think you had one.
I had mentioned this to several staff members when I was going around adding my comments, that it was great to have the opportunity to add our comments to the strategies that have been recommended by staff, but I didn't see the same opportunity to make comments about the strategies that several of us, residents and EJ advocates, have been recommending for a month. So I do believe we need an element or a way for us to give our feedback on those.
So the question is basically, there's some strategies that have been submitted by steering committee members and community members that you're not seeing represented here. Okay, thank you very much for that. Another question. Here we go.
On our exercise tonight, how will you actually decide which ones are rising as the priority versus the ones that aren't?
So based on the comments received, how are the strategies going to be prioritized in the actual plan itself?
That's a really good question. So I think, the obvious ones I think are visually obvious around the room. So I think Ivanka's talking a little bit more about the ones that have pink. They're asking for funding adjustments. So as mentioned by Sam, we certainly need to dive through a lot of these comments. Some of them are pink and just outright say, we don't, this isn't something we support or we want. And some of them are pink with a lot of comments that might otherwise support it as suggested. So we'll certainly, I think, take a really hard look at the ones that maybe just generated no support and kind of consider those as clearly a lower priority. But the ones that are sort of in between, we will definitely, I guess it's probably measure by measure. Something we can consider though, and this is kind of going to be important, something I touched on earlier, is that even though maybe we have some questions about the funding amounts or the adjustments to be made, we can, once the CERP is adopted in whatever form it is in the next few days as we finalize that, then have a prioritization for maybe implementation. And as part of the implementation with the steering committee, we can still continue to go through prioritization exercises, maybe, is what I'm thinking. I'm seeing some nodding, because I think that's a really good point. Obviously, there's some funding that's available, some that's yet to come, some that we're still searching for, so that can be continually as part of the implementation. How do we prioritize which strategies go first? So maybe it's not fully supported, but maybe that just means it's a lower priority, but still part of the CERP. Another question back here.
Great, thank you. Jessica, could we get that in writing, sent to the steering committee regarding the prioritization for the incentive funding as to after the CERP is voted on?
Get in writing that we will commit to, maybe that's, and I think there is something to that effect in the CERP, but maybe you're right. Maybe we highlight somewhere a little bit more about that, exactly kind of the way that I couched the intro to this whole exercise of that flexibility as we move forward, prioritization, guidelines, all of these things might be fluid and might change with input. So we can look into what we can put and send out to the steering committee or point to if it's already kind of couched in there.
Great, thank you.
Oh, Ivanka, here, I'll.
On the list of the amounts that are going to each strategy, some of them still have TBD on them. It's just, I know what you just said is we still have time to prioritize, but without having ballpark figures, it's hard to still prioritize which ones are most important.
Just acknowledging, yeah, that's certainly a good point. We can kind of consider that, and I think there are some comments to that effect on the measures as I was walking around. So we'll take a look at all of that.
Okay. Any other questions from steering committee members? About members of the public? Oh, one in the back here. Yes, ma'am.
Lo que yo quiero comentar es que viendo este ejercicio que hicimos, hay muchos, bueno, no muchos, pero hay fondos destinados para diferentes incentivos, digo, para más lo de compañías y eso, pero estamos viendo más en esta parte en donde tiene que ser sobre lo de alcance, información a la comunidad y también de cómo poner más barreras y eso que ayuden a limpiar el aire, pero no hay fondos, no se ve ahí la cantidad de fondos en lo que tiene que ver con lo de la comunidad y cómo limpiar lo del aire, pero sí muchos incentivos para y este ejercicio nos sirvió porque ahí podemos ver claramente hacia dónde van los incentivos y qué parte sigue quedando otra vez sin recursos que son para lo de la comunidad. Entonces, por una parte está bien que hicimos este ejercicio porque ahí podemos ver las metas, podemos ver la cantidad de dinero y también lo otro, ¿no? Que respecta a lo de la comunidad y limpiar más el aire a través de la naturaleza.
Thank you for that comment.
Something that was kind of irritating for me was to read the different strategies, and it sounds wonderful, but until you read the fine print or the last line, contingent upon future state funding or contingent upon something else, which is the same to me as just saying no, and it continues what Oralia just said, is that the most important things for the community priority are being pushed to the bottom below what the incentives are going to industry.
I think one additional comment, and then we'll probably wrap up here. Here you go.
Buenas noches. Estamos mirando todas aquí, nosotras nos rompimos mucho la cabeza. No sé si van a traducir. Entonces, ¿cómo voy a decir lo que voy a decir? Ok, nos rompimos mucho la cabeza esta noche.
So we were having a hard time working together.
Espero que todo lo que está puesto en esto sea verdad y sea para beneficio de verdad de la comunidad y no para las grandes corporaciones o industrias.
What we really want to see is that the strategies that we are recommending are really going to benefit the community and not the industry.
Porque hay algunas cosas que hemos trabajado por meses atrás y no los hemos mirado. Quisiéramos que también implementaran eso para ayudar a nuestras comunidades.
Because we have been making recommendations for months of what we want to see change in our communities, and we don't see those recommendations made it up to these printed sheets there.
Como por ejemplo hay fondos que hay para las industrias grandes como los Fearless que van a quemar la leña y van a hacer multas o van a dar ayuda. Y para nosotros que vamos a quemar leña en chimenea para calentarnos, nos van a multar igual manera. O sea, tenemos que mejorar y ayudar de una manera u otra porque los campos agrícolas tienen fondos, nosotros no tenemos esos fondos.
So an example she's giving is there's going to be incentives for to replace ag burning or not to do ag burning and do something else. Yet what we see is also that for residential burning, they're going to go and find and try to do more inspections to try to catch up residents that are burning. So ag industry and the growers, they have money, and you are still giving them money instead and finding the residents.
No alcanzamos a poner los muchos papelitos, pero tratamos de poner lo más que pudimos porque necesitamos ese apoyo, la comunidad.
We were not able to put all our comments in every single sheet, but we put as many as we could because we really want to see help for our communities.
Thank you. Certainly, we want to take in all that feedback. And something that we can certainly, maybe we can work together to talk a little bit with some of our enforcement folks on how we do enforce, not of course just residences, but all of the industry that we've talked about throughout the whole implementation or development of the CERP. And we can totally get some more information on how we do provide specifically for residential wood burning, those incentives to those folks, and how maybe part of our job is to continue to make sure that everyone knows about that, because maybe that's part of the problem too, is they don't know to take advantage of the funding that we do have. So it's great feedback. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all. So as we said, I know there was a great deal of support, and the committee voted to hold another meeting. District staff will look into the logistics of that and get back to all of you very shortly. I would say, there's obviously a wealth of information that you've put on all the sheets. The district will need a little bit of time to digest all of that, but it's clear that you have some great ideas, and there may still need to be a few changes. This is sort of the end of one phase of the project. We're getting towards the end of the steering committee for the purposes of CERP development. But now there's a lot more work to do on implementation. I think the slides were certainly supportive of that, and it's clear that there's still questions that need to be answered. So I would just say, before I hand it over to the district for any final comments, thank you for continuing to stay involved, and we certainly look forward to the next phase and all of your participation.
I just echo those same sentiments, and like you said, we'll get back to you shortly on next steps, and otherwise, have a good night. Thank you so much. We'll be here as we clean up. Please ask us questions. We're still here for you for that. Thank you.